How many times have you gone to the movies and been let down because it feels like you've seen the exact same movie a dozen times before? Ideas have been recycled so much that us writers tend to swear off anything that's ever been done before in the name of creating something that's completely new and original. But this tutorial is a plea that you might rethink that plan a little bit. There are so many archetypes of story, archetypes of character, archetypes of relationships. They've been around for decades, sometimes centuries. These archetypes have been around for so long because they're very accurate and honest. And if they seem generic, it's only because they aren't done well. Let's look at story archetypes, for example. The Wizard of Oz is essentially a story about a young person that doesn't like it at home, but once they get sent far away, will do anything to get back home. This is also the plot of Back to the Future. But I seriously doubt that many people sat there in the theater watching Back to the Future and said, yeah, we've seen this before in The Wizard of Oz. And that's because Back to the Future was so original and different. But the archetype of the plot, this idea of wanting to leave home and struggling to get back home, is the exact same in both films. If you think about it, this is kind of the plot to Shawshank Redemption. Andy is not very happy at home, gets sent to prison. Now he wants to get back out. Or in other words, he wants to go back home. Or if you wanted to get more symbolic about it, movies like Citizen Kane and Gone with the Wind are essentially about characters that are trying to recover that feeling of being home again.
I'm home. I'm home.
You know, I mean, Saving Private Ryan, E.T., these are all movies with this theme of going back home.
E.T. phone home.
This concept of going home is such a common story motif because it rings so true. We can all relate to wanting to go back home, or at least to feel those feelings of being somewhere where we're welcome and it feels like we can just hang our hat and relax. And if we dress it up with Oz, or a time-traveling DeLorean, or an alien that eats Reese's Pieces or whatever, we have a very powerful story archetype that still feels very fresh and original. What about other story archetypes? Basically, The Matrix is about a guy in a system, questioning that system, and then trying to destroy that system. This is also essentially the plot behind the wonderful Disney classic Monsters, Inc., or another animated film, How to Train Your Dragon. Same basic story archetype, completely different films.
Killed thousands of them.
On a deeper level, Jaws is just about a guy being terrorized by a creature that has no idea what it's doing, which is nearly identical to the story of What About Bob?
That's the whole point! He's never gone!
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Now, we're talking about getting ideas for stories in this chapter, but this idea of borrowing archetypes also works for character types and their relationship to the protagonist. How many times do we see the mentor figure that shows up to help the protagonist and then usually ends up dead so that the protagonist has to go it alone? This is really obvious with characters like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda in Star Wars and Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings movies. But we also see mentors like Mickey from Rocky, or even more subtle mentors like the best friend in a stereotypical romantic comedy who tells the protagonist to give love another chance or whatever. In the world of that film, that character is still a mentor. In The Assurance, we actually played on another very common archetype, that of Messiah. Much like Jesus in the Bible, probably the most famous of those, these savior figures are often innocent scapegoats that hold the power of the world in their hands. Cordelia was clearly one of these types of Messiah figures. And as we'll look at later, my wife Heather brilliantly pointed out that Tayani was very much like the figure of Mary in that religious story, who had to make some pretty big sacrifices to save the world as well. This messianic archetype is especially common in fantasy worlds, such as with Ender in Ender's Game, or Frodo in Lord of the Rings. It's also common in superhero movies, especially in the case of Superman. But hints of this archetype are really everywhere. You can see it in William Wallace from Braveheart, or even Cole, the little kid from The Sixth Sense.
I see dead people.
Frequently in movies, you'll have a character that tests the character's resolve, the main protagonist's resolve. This character is often called the Guardian of the Threshold. Basically, as the protagonist is on the threshold of going after their objective, the Guardian of the Threshold is there to guard the path, to make sure the protagonist is ready for that journey. So this person might be friendly or antagonistic to the protagonist. When Captain Miller in Saving Private Ryan gets the orders to go save Private Ryan, his team guards the threshold and gives him all kinds of actually very valid reasons to reject the mission.
You want to explain the math of this to me? I mean, where's the sense of risking the lives of the 8 of us to save one guy?
One of my personal favorite examples of threshold guarding is in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Scott is in love with Ramona, but according to the mythology of the film, he has to conquer her 7 ex-lovers in order to have a relationship with her. These evil exes were put there to test Scott's love for Ramona. They were antagonistic in this case, but again, sometimes threshold guardians can be friendly. In Frozen, Anna, the protagonist, wants to go find her sister, but her new boyfriend tries to stop her. He was motivated by care for Anna, but he was still guarding that threshold.
Please.
Anna, no, it's too dangerous.
Now, this threshold guarding business is another example of an archetype that works because it's true. I mean, have you ever tried to make a big change in your life? To maybe lose weight, start a business, to sober up, quit smoking, or whatever? There's probably been somebody there in your life to tease you about ordering salad when everybody else is ordering pizza. They are being guardians of the threshold. And in order to get what you want, you will have to be able to conquer them, just like in the movies. Now, my point here is that archetypes are based on truths about the human experience and can not only spark ideas for your script, but they could also add a lot of power to your stories. And even though these are very common templates we see every day in real life and in the movies, they don't have to be generic in your films.